Thoughts on the Revival of Religion in New England. Chapter 8. Error in rejecting the work as a whole on account of incidental defects in it. Another foundational error of those that reject this work is their not duly distinguishing the good from the bad, and very unjustly judging of the whole by a part, and so rejecting the work in general or in the main substance of it for the sake of some things accidental to it that are evil. They look for more in men that are divinely influenced, because subject to the operations of the good Spirit, than is justly to be expected from them. For that reason, in this imperfect state and dark world, where so much blindness and corruption remain in the best, when any profess to have received light and influence and comfort from heaven, and to have had sensible communion with God, many are ready to expect that now they appear like angels, and not still like poor people blind and sinful worms of the dust. There being so much corruption left in the hearts of God's own children, and its prevailing as it sometimes does, is indeed a mysterious thing, and always a stumbling block to the world. But it will not be so much wondered at by those who are well versed in and duly minded of two things. One, the Word of God, which teaches us the state of true Christians in this world, and two, their own hearts, at least, if they have any grace and have experience of its conflicts with corruption. They that are true saints are most inexcusable in making a great difficulty of a great deal of blindness and many sinful errors in those that profess godliness. If our own conduct, both open and secret, should be known, and our hearts laid open to the world, how should we be even ready to fly from the light of the sun and hide ourselves from the view of mankind? And what greater allowances would it be found that we should need that others should make for us? Perhaps much greater than we are willing to make for others. The great weakness of the larger part of mankind in any matter that is new and uncommon is not distinguishing, but either approving or condemning all in the lump. They that highly approve of the thing in general cannot bear to have anything at all find fault with, and on the other hand, those that fasten their eyes upon some things in it that are amiss and appear very disagreeable to them, at once reject the whole, both which errors oftentimes arise from want of persons' due acquaintancy with themselves. It is rash and unjust when we proceed thus in judging either of a particular person or people, or of such a work as the present wonderful influence on the minds of the people of this land. Many, if they see anything very ill in a particular person, a minister or private professor will at once brand him as a hypocrite. And if there be two or three of a people or society that behave themselves very irregularly, the whole must bear the blame of it. And if there be a few, though not above 1 in 100, that professed and had a show of being the happy partakers of what are called the saving benefits of this work, who prove not and give the world just grounds to suspect them, the whole work must be rejected on their account. And those in general that make the like profession must be condemned for their sakes. So careful are some persons lest this work should be defended, that now they will hardly allow that the influence of the Spirit of God on the heart can so much as indirectly and accidentally be the occasion of the exercise of corruption and commission of sin. Thus far is true that the influence of the Spirit of God in His saving operations will not be an occasion of the increase of the corruption of the heart in general, but on the contrary of the weakening of it. Yet there is nothing unreasonable in supposing that at the same time that it weakens corruption in general, it may be an occasion of turning what is left into a new channel, and so of there being more of some certain kinds of the exercise of corruption than there was before, as that which tends to hinder and stop the course of a stream, if it does not do it wholly, may give a new course to so much of the water as gets by the obstacle. The influences of the Spirit, for instance, may be an occasion of new ways of the exercise of pride, as has been acknowledged by orthodox divines in general, that spiritual discoveries and comforts may, through the corruption of the heart, be an occasion of the exercise of spiritual pride, did not use to be doubted of, until now it is found to be needful to maintain the war against this work. They that will hardly allow that a work of the Spirit of God can be a remote occasion of any sinful behavior or unchristian conduct, I suppose will allow that the truly gracious influences of the Spirit of God, yea, and a high degree of love to God, is consistent with these two things, namely, a considerable degree of remaining corruption, and also many errors in judgment in matters of religion and in matters of practice. And this is all that need to be allowed, in order to its being most demonstratively evident that a high degree of love to God may accidentally move a person to that which is very wroth and contrary to the mind and will of God. For a high degree of love to God will strongly move a person to do that which he believes to be agreeable to God's will. And therefore, if he be mistaken and be persuaded that that is agreeable to the will of God, which indeed is very contrary to it, then his love will accidentally but strongly incline him to that which is indeed very contrary to the will of God. They that are studied in logic have learned that the nature of the cause is not to be judged of by the nature of the effect, nor the nature of the effect from the nature of the cause, when the cause is only or an occasional cause. Yea, that in such a case oftentimes the nature of the effect is quite contrary to the nature of the cause. True disciples of Christ may have a great deal of false zeal, such as the disciples had of old when they would have fire called from heaven to come down on the Samaritans because they did not receive them. And even so eminently holy and great and divine a saint as Moses, who conversed with God from time to time as a man speaks with his friend, and concerning whom God gives his testimony that he was very meek above any man on the face of the earth, yet may be rash and sinful in his zeal when his spirit is stirred by the hard-heartedness and opposition of others, so as to speak very unadvisedly with his lips, and greatly to offend God and shut himself out from the possession of the good things that God is about to accomplish for his church on earth, as Moses was excluded Canaan, though he had brought the people out of Egypt. Psalms 106, verse 32 and 33. And men, even in those very things wherein they are influenced by a truly pious principle, yet, through error and want of due consideration and caution, may be very rash with their zeal. It was a truly good spirit that animated the excellent generation of Israel in Joshua's time. In the proceedings we have an account of in the 22nd chapter of Joshua, and yet they were rash and heady with their zeal, to go about to gather all Israel together, to go up so furiously to war with their brethren of the 2 tribes and a half, about their building the altar, without first inquiring into the matter, or so much as sending the messenger to be informed. So the Christians that were of the circumcision, with warmth and contention, condemned Peter for receiving Cornelius, as we have account, Acts chapter 11. This, their heat and censure was unjust, and Peter was wronged in it. But there is in all appearance in the story that they acted from a real zeal and concern for the will and honor of God. So the primitive Christians, from their zeal for and against unclean meats, censored and condemned one another. This was a bad effect. And yet the apostle bears them witness, or at least expresses his charity towards them, that both sides acted from a good principle and true respect to the Lord. Romans 14, verse 6. The zeal of the Corinthians with respect to the incestuous man, though the apostle highly commends it, was yet such that at the same time he saw that they needed a caution, lest they should carry it too far to an undue severity, and so as to fail of Christian meekness and forgiveness. 2 Corinthians 2, verse 6 through 11, and chapter 7, verse 11, to the end. Luther, the great reformer, had a great deal of bitterness with his zeal. It surely cannot be wondered at by considerable persons that at a time when multitudes all over the land have their affections greatly moved, great numbers should run into many errors and mistakes with respect to their duty, and consequently into many acts and practices that are imprudent and irregular. I question whether there be a man in New England of the strongest reason and greatest learning, but would be tried to keep master of himself, thoroughly to weigh his words, and consider all the consequences of his behavior, so as to conduct himself in all respects prudently. If he were so strongly impressed with a sense of divine and eternal things, and his affections so exceedingly moved, as has been frequent of late among the common people, how little do they consider human nature, who look upon it as so insurmountable a stumbling block, when such multitudes of all kinds of capacities, natural tempers, educations, customs, and manners of life are so greatly and variously affected, that imprudency and irregularities of conduct should abound, especially in a state of things so uncommon, and when the degree, extent, swiftness, and power of the operations is so very extraordinary and so new that there has not been time and experience enough to give birth to rules for people's conduct, and so unusual in times past that the writings of divines do not afford rules to direct us in such a state of things. A great deal of noise and tumult, confusion and uproar and darkness, mixed with light and evil with good, is always to be expected in the beginning of something very extraordinary and very glorious in the state of things in human society or the Church of God, as after nature has long been shut up in a cold, dead state in time of winter, when the sun returns in the spring, there is, together with the increase of the light and heat of the sun, very unpleasant and tempestuous weather, before all settled, calm, and serene, and all nature rejoices in its blooms and beauty. It is in the new creation, as it was in the old, the Spirit of God first moved upon the face of the waters, which was an occasion of great uproar and tumult, and things were gradually brought to a settled state, until at length all stood forth in beautiful, peaceful order, when the heavens and the earth were finished, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. When God is about to bring to pass something great and glorious in the world, natural in the firmament and struggle, and the world, as it were, in travail, as when God was about to introduce the Messiah into the world, in that new and glorious dispensation that he set up, he shook the heavens and the earth and shook all nations. There is nothing that the Church of God is in Scripture more frequently represented than by them the tree, the vine, corn, etc., which gradually bring forth their fruit and are first green before they are ripe. A great revival of religion is expressly compared to this gradual production of vegetation. Isaiah 61, verse 11, as the earth bringeth forth her bud, and as the garden causes the thing that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations. The church is in a special manner compared to a palm tree. Canticles 7, verse 7 and 8, Exodus 15, verse 27, 1 Kings 6, verse 29, Psalms 92, verse 12. Of which tree this peculiar thing is observed, that the fruit of it, though it be very sweet and good when it is ripe, yet before it has had time to ripen has a mixture of poison. The weakness of human nature has always appeared in times of the great revival of religion by disposition to run to extremes and get into confusion, and especially in these three things: enthusiasm, superstition, and intemperate zeal. So it appeared in the time of the Reformation very remarkably, and also in the days of the apostles. Many were then exceedingly disposed to lay weight on those things that were very notional and chimical, giving heed to fables and whimsies, as appeared in 1 Timothy 1:4 and 1 Timothy 4:7, 2 Timothy 2:16, 2 Timothy 2:23, Titus 1:14, Titus 3:9. Many, as ecclesiastical history informs us, fell off into the most wild enthusiasm and extravagant notions of spirituality and extraordinary illumination from heaven beyond others, and many were prone to superstition, will worship, and a voluntary humility, giving heed to the commandments of men, being fond of an unprofitable bodily exercise, as appears by many passages in the Apostles' writings, and what a proneness then appeared among professors to swerve from the path of duty, and the spirit of the gospel, and the exercise of a rash, indiscreet zeal, censoring and condemning ministers and people. One saying, I am of Paul, another, I of Apollos, another, I of Cephas, judging one another for differences of opinion about smaller matters, unclean meats, holy days, and holy places, and their different opinions and practices respecting civil intercourse and communication with their heathen neighbors. And how much did vain jaggling and disputing and confusion prevail through undue heat of spirit under the name of a religious zeal? 2 Timothy 6, 4 and 5, 2 Timothy 2, 16, and Titus 3, 9. And what a task had the apostles to keep them within bounds and maintain the good order in the churches. How often are they mentioning their irregularities? The prevailing of such disorders seems to have been the special occasion of writing many of their epistles. The church, in the great infusion of the Spirit at that time, and the strong impressions that God's people were then under, was under the care of infallible guides that watched over them day and night. And yet so prone were they, through the weakness and corruption of human nature, to get out of the way, that irregularity and confusion rose in some churches where there was an extraordinary outpouring of the Spirit to a very great height, even in the apostles' lifetime and under their eye. And though some of the apostles lived long to settle the state of things, yet presently, after they were dead, the Christian church ran into many superstitions and childish notions and practices, and in some respects into a great severity in their zeal. And that any wise person that has not, in the midst of the disputes of the present day, got beyond the calmness of consideration, impartially consider to what lengths we may reasonably suppose many of the primitive Christians in their heat of zeal and under their extraordinary impressions would soon have gone if they had had no inspired guides, and whether it is not probable that a church of Corinth in particular, by an instance of their irregularities and contentions, would not in a little time have broken to pieces and dissolved in a state of the utmost confusion. And yet this would have been no evidence that there had not been a most glorious and remarkable outpouring of the Spirit in that city. But as for us, we have no infallible apostle to guide us, no rectified disorders and reclaim us when we are wandering, but every one does what is right in his own eyes. And they that err in judgment and are gone into a wrong path continue to wander till experience of the mischievous issue convinces them of their error. If we look at this work and seriously weigh it in its circumstances, it will appear a matter of no great difficulty to account for the errors that have occurred, supposing the work in general to be from a very great outpouring of the Spirit of God. It may easily be accounted for that many have run into great errors and into just such errors as they have. It is known that some that have been employed as great instruments to promote this work have been very young, and how natural is it for such as are themselves newly awakened out of sleep and brought out of that state of darkness, insensibility, and spiritual death which they had been in ever since they were born, and have a new and wonderful scene open to them, and have in view the reality, the vastness, and infinite importance and the nearness of spiritual and eternal things, and at the same time are surprised to see the world asleep about them, and have not the advantage of age and experience, and have had but little opportunity to study divinity or to converse with aged, experienced Christians and divines. I say, how natural is it for such to fall into many errors with respect to the state of mankind, with which they are so surprised, and with respect to the means and methods of their reliefs. Is it any wonders that they have not at once learned how to make all the allowances that are to be made, and that they do not at once find out the method of dealing with the world that is adapted to the mysterious state and nature of mankind? Is it any wonder that they cannot at once foresee what the consequences of things will be, what evils are to be guarded against, and what difficulties are like to arise that are to be provided for? We have long been in a strange stupor. The influences of the Spirit of God upon the heart have been but little felt, and the nature of them but little taught, so that they are in many respects new to great numbers of those that have lately fallen under them. And is it any wonder that they, who never before had experience of the supernatural influence of the divine Spirit upon their souls and never were instructed in the nature of these influences, do not so well know how to distinguish one extraordinary new impression from another, and so, to themselves insensibly, run into enthusiasms, taking every strong impulse or impression to be divine? How natural is it to suppose that among the multitudes of illiterate people, most of which are in their youth, who find themselves so wonderfully changed and brought into such new and before to them almost unheard of circumstances, many should pass wrong and very strange judgments of both persons and things that are about them, and that now they behold them in such a new light, they in their surprise should go further from the judgment that they were wont to make of them than they ought, and in their great change of sentiments should pass from one extreme to another? And why should it be thought strange that those that scarce ever heard of any such thing as an outpouring of the Spirit of God before, or if they did, had no correct idea of it, do not know how to behave themselves in such a new and strange state of things? And is it any wonder that they are ready to hearken to those that have instructed them, that have been the means of delivering them from such a state of death and misery as they were in before, or have a name for being the happy instruments of promoting the same work among others? Is it unaccountable that persons in these circumstances are ready to receive everything they say and to drink down error as well as truth from them? And why should there be any indignation and no compassion towards those that are thus misled, when these persons are extraordinarily affected with a new sense and recent discovery they have received of the greatness and excellency of the divine being, the certainty and infinite importance of eternal things, the preciousness of souls, and the dreadful danger and madness of mankind, together with a great sense of God's distinguishing kindness and love to them? No wonder that now they think they must exert themselves to do something extraordinary for the honor of God and the good of the souls of their fellow creatures, and know not how to sit still and forbear speaking and acting with uncommon eagerness and vigor. And in these circumstances, if they be not persons of more than common steadiness and discretion, or have not some person of wisdom to direct them, it is a wonder if they do not proceed without due caution and do things that are irregular and that will, in the issue, do much more hurt than good. Censoring others is the worst disease with which this work has been attended. But yet, such a time as this is indeed a time of great temptation to this sinful error, when there has been such a time of great and long-continued deadness, and many are brought out of a state of nature into a state of grace in so extraordinary a manner, and filled with such uncommon degrees of light. It is natural for such to form their notions of a state of grace wholly from what they experience. Many of them know no other way, for they never have been taught much about a state of grace and the different degrees of grace, and the degrees of darkness and corruption that grace is consistent with, nor concerning the manner of the influences of the Spirit in converting the soul, and the variety of the manner of his operations. They therefore form in their opinions and ideas of the state of grace only by their own experience. No wonder that it appears an insurmountable difficulty to them to reconcile such a state, of which they have this idea, with what they observe in professors that are about them. It is indeed in itself a very great mystery that grace should be consistent with so much and in such kind of corruption as sometimes prevails in the truly godly, and no wonder that it especially appears so to uninstructed new converts that have been converted in an extraordinary manner. Though censoriousness is very sinful, and is most commonly found in hypocrites and the persons of pharisaical spirit, yet it is not so inconsistent with true godliness as some imagine. We have remarkable instances of it in these holy men that we have an account of in the book of Job. Not only were Job's friends, 3 friends, that seems to have been eminently holy men, guilty of it in very reasonable censoring the best man on earth, very positively determining that he was an unconverted man, but Job himself that was not only a man of true piety, but excelled all men in piety, and particularly excelled in a humble, meek, and patient spirit, was guilty of bitterly censuring his 3 friends as wicked, vile hypocrites. Job 16:9-11. He teareth me in his wrath, who hateth me. He gnashed upon me with his teeth. Mine enemy sharpeneth his eyes upon me. They have gaped upon me with their mouth. God hath delivered me to the ungodly, and turned me over into the hands of the wicked. So is he very positive in it that they are hypocrites, and shall be miserably destroyed as such. In the next chapter, verses 2-4, are there not mockers with me? And doth not mine eye continue in their provocation? Lay down now, put me in surety with thee. Who is he that will strike hands with me? For thou hast hid their heart from understanding. Therefore shalt thou not exalt them. And again, verses 8-10. Upright men shall be astonished at this, and the innocent shall stir up himself against the hypocrite. The righteous also shall hold on his way, and he that hath clean hands shall be stronger and stronger. But as for you all, do ye return and come now? For I cannot find one wise man, in example, one good man, among you. Thus I think the errors and irregularities that attend this work may be accounted for from the consideration of the infirmity and weakness and common corruption of mankind, together with the circumstances of the work, though we should suppose it to be the work of God. And it would not be a just objection in any to say, if these powerful impressions and great inflictions are from the Spirit of God, why does not the same Spirit give strength of understanding and capacity in proportion to those persons that are the subject of them, so that strong affections may not, through their error, drive them to an irregular and sinful conduct? For I do not know that God has anywhere obliged himself to do it. The end of the influence of God's Spirit is to make men spiritually knowing, wise to salvation, which is the most excellent wisdom, and he has also appointed means for our gaining such degrees of other knowledge as we need to conduct ourselves regularly, which means should be carefully used. But the end of the influence of the Spirit of God is not so increased man's natural capacity, nor has God obliged himself immediately to increase civil prudence in proportion to the degrees of spiritual light. If we consider the errors that attend this work, not only as from man and his infirmity, but also as from God, and by his permission and disposal, they are not strange upon the supposition of its being as to the substance of it, a work of God. If God intends this great revival of religion to be the dawning or the forerunner of a happy state of his church on earth, it may be an incident of the divine wisdom at the beginning of it to suffer so many irregularities and errors in conduct, to which he knew men in their great weak state were most exposed under great religious affections and when animated with great zeal, for it will be very likely to be of excellent benefit to his church in the continuance and progress of the work afterwards. Their experience in the first settling out of the mischievous consequences of these errors and smarting for them in the beginning may be a happy defense to them afterwards for many generations from these errors, which otherwise they might continually be exposed to, as when David and all Israel went about to bring back the ark into the midst of the land after it had been long absent, first in the land of the Philistines, and then in Kirjath-jearim, in the utmost borders of the land. They at first sought not the Lord after the due order, and they smarted for their error. But this put them upon studying the law, and more thoroughly acquainting themselves with the mind and will of God, and seeking and serving him with greater circumspection, and the consequence with glories. After seeking God in such a manner as was accepted of him, and the ark of God ascending into the heights of Zion, with those great and extraordinary rejoicings of the king and all the people, without any frown or rebuke from God intermingled, with God's dwelling therefore in the midst of the people to this glorious purposes, they are expressed in the 68th Psalm. And it is very analogous in the manner of God's dealing with his people to permit a great deal of error and suffer the infirmity of his people much to appear in the beginning of such a glorious work of His grace for their happiness, to teach them what they are, to humble them and fit them for that glorious prosperity He is about to advance them to, and the more to secure to Himself the honor of such a glorious work. For by man's exceeding weakness appearing in the beginning of it, it is evident that God does not lay the foundation of it in man's strength or wisdom. And as we need not wonder at the errors that attend this work, if we look at the hand of men that are guilty of them, and the hand of God in permitting them, so neither shall we see cause to wonder at them if we consider them with regard to the hand that Satan has in them. For as the work is much greater than any other outpouring of the Spirit that ever has been in New England, so no wonder that the devil is more alarmed and enraged, and exerts himself more vigorously against it, and does more powerfully endeavor to tempt and mislead those that are the subjects of it and are its promoters. End of chapter 8, having been read by Peter John Parisi, also known as Brian Dean. None of my audios are copyrighted. Please feel free to make as many copies as you desire to the glory of God.